a WikiVidi Documentaries production. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Enjoy. Apollo 13 film. Apollo 13 is a 1995 American space docudrama film directed by Ron Howard and starring Tom Hanks, Kevin Bacon, Bill Paxton, Gary Sinise, and Ed Harris. The screenplay with William Broyles Jr. and Al Reinert, that dramatizes the aborted 1970 Apollo 13 lunar mission, is an adaptation of the book Lost Moon, The Perilous Voyage of Apollo 13 by astronaut Jim Lovell and Jeffrey Kluger. The film depicts astronauts Lovell, Jack Swigert, and Fred Haise aboard Apollo 13 for America's third moon landing mission. En route, an onboard explosion deprives their spacecraft of most of its oxygen supply and electric power, forcing NASA's flight controllers to abort the moon landing, and turning the mission into a struggle to get the three men home safely. Howard went to great lengths to create a technically accurate movie, employing NASA's technical assistance in astronaut and flight controller training for his cast, and obtaining permission to film scenes aboard a reduced-gravity aircraft for realistic depiction of the weightlessness experienced by the astronauts in space. Released to cinemas in the United States on June 30, 1995, Apollo 13 was nominated for 9 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. In total, the film grossed over $355 million worldwide during its theatrical releases. The film was very positively received by critics. Plot. In July 1969, astronaut Jim Lovell hosts a house party where guests watch Neil Armstrong's televised first human steps on the moon. Afterwards, Lovell, who had orbited the moon on Apollo 8, tells his wife Marilyn that he intends to return to the moon to walk on its surface. 3 months later, as Lovell conducts a VIP tour of NASA's Vertical Assembly Building, his boss Deke Slayton informs him that, because of problems with Alan Shepard's crew, his crew will fly Apollo 13 instead of 14. Lovell, Ken Mattingly, and Fred Haise train for their new mission. A few days before launch, Mattingly is exposed to the measles, and the flight surgeon demands his replacement with Mattingly's backup, Jack Swigert. Lovell resists breaking up his team, but relents when Slayton threatens to bump his crew to a later mission. As the launch date approaches, Marilyn has a nightmare about her husband getting killed in space, but goes to the Kennedy Space Center the night before launch to see him off. On April 11, 1970, flight director Gene Kranz gives the go-ahead from Houston's Mission Control Center for the Apollo 13 launch. As the Saturn V rocket climbs through the atmosphere, a second stage engine cuts off prematurely, but the craft reaches its Earth parking orbit. After the third stage fires to send Apollo 13 to the moon, Swigert performs the maneuver to connect the command/service module Odyssey to the lunar module Aquarius and pull it away from the spent rocket. 3 days into the mission, the crew makes a television transmission, which the networks decline to broadcast live. After Swigert turns on the liquid oxygen tank stirring fans as requested, one of the tanks explodes, emptying its contents into space and sending the craft tumbling. The other tank is soon found to be leaking. They attempt to stop the leak by shutting off fuel cells but to no avail. With the fuel cells closed, the moon landing must be aborted, and Lovell and Haise must hurriedly power up Aquarius to use as a lifeboat for the return home. As Swigert shuts down Odyssey before its battery power runs out. In Houston, Kranz rallies his team to come up with a plan to bring the astronauts home safely, declaring, "Failure is not an option." Controller John Aaron recruits Mattingly to help him invent a procedure to restart Odyssey for the landing on Earth. As Swigert and Haise watch the moon pass beneath them, Lovell laments his lost chance of walking on its surface, then turns their attention to the business of getting home. With Aquarius running on minimal electrical power, the crew suffers freezing conditions, and Haise contracts a urinary infection and a fever. Swigert suspects mission controllers withholding their inability to get them home. Haise angrily blames Swigert's inexperience for the accident, and Lovell quickly squelches the argument. When carbon dioxide approaches dangerous levels, ground control must quickly invent a way to make the command module's square filters work in the lunar module's round receptacles. With the guidance systems on Aquarius shut down, the crew must make a difficult but vital course correction by manually igniting the lunar module's engine. Mattingly and Aaron struggle to find a way to turn on the command module systems without drawing too much power, and finally transmit the procedure to Swigert, who restarts Odyssey by transferring extra power from Aquarius. When the crew jettisons the service module, they are surprised to see the extent of the damage. As they release Aquarius and re-enter the Earth's atmosphere, no one is sure that Odyssey's heat shield is intact. The tense period of radio silence due to ionization blackout is longer than normal, but the astronauts report all is well, and splash down in the Pacific Ocean. As helicopters bring the 3 men aboard the recovery ship USS Iwo Jima for a hero's welcome, Lovell's voice-over describes the subsequent investigation into the explosion, and the careers of Haise, Swigert, Mattingly, and Kranz. He wonders if, and when mankind will return to the moon. Cast. The real Jim Lovell appears as captain of the recovery ship USS Iwo Jima. Howard had intended to make him an admiral, but Lovell himself, having retired as a captain, chose to appear in his actual rank. Horror film director Roger Corman, a mentor of Howard, appears as a congressman being given a VIP tour by Lovell of the vehicle assembly building, as it had become something of a tradition for Corman to make a cameo appearance in his protégé's films. The real Marilyn Lovell appeared among the spectators during the launch sequence. CBS News anchor Walter Cronkite appears in archive news footage and can be heard in newly recorded announcements, some of which he edited himself, to sound more authentic. In addition to his brother, Clint Howard, several other members of Ron Howard's family appear in the movie. Brad Pitt was offered a role in the film, but turned it down to star in Say 7N. Reportedly, the real Pete Conrad expressed interest in appearing in the film. Jeffrey Kluger appears as a television reporter. Pre-production and props. The screenplay with William Broyles Jr. and Al Reinert was rewritten by John Sayles after Hanks had been cast, and construction of the spacecraft sets had begun. While planning the film, director Ron Howard decided that every shot of the film would be original and that no mission footage would be used. The spacecraft interiors were constructed by the Kansas Cosmosphere and Space Center's Space Works, which also restored the Apollo 13 command module. 2 individual lunar modules and 2 command modules were constructed for filming. While each was a replica, composed of some of the original Apollo materials, they were built so that different sections were removable, which enabled filming to take place inside the capsules. SpaceWorks also built modified command and lunar modules for filming inside a Boeing KC-135 reduced gravity aircraft, and the pressure suits worn by the actors, which are exact reproductions of those worn by the Apollo astronauts, right down to the detail of being airtight. When the actors put the suits on with their helmets locked in place, air was pumped into the suits to cool them down and allow them to breathe, exactly as in launch preparations for the real Apollo missions. The real Mission Control Center consisted of 2 control rooms located on the 2nd and 3rd floors of Building 30 at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. NASA offered the use of the control room for filming, but Howard declined, opting instead to make his own replica from scratch. Production designer Michael Kornblith and set decorator Meredith Boswell were in charge of the construction of the Mission Control set at Universal Studios. The set was equipped with giant rear screen projection capabilities and a complex set of computers with individual video feeds to all the flight controller stations. The actors playing the flight controllers were able to communicate with each other on a private audio loop. The mission control room built for the film was on the ground floor. One NASA employee, who was a consultant for the film, said that the set was so realistic that he would leave at the end of the day and look for the elevator before remembering he was not in mission control. By the time the film was made, the USS Iwo Jima had been scrapped, so her sister ship, the USS New Orleans, was used as the recovery ship instead. Howard anticipated difficulty in portraying weightlessness in a realistic manner. He discussed this with Steven Spielberg, who suggested using a KC-135 airplane, which can be flown in such a way as to create about 23 seconds of weightlessness, a method NASA has always used to train its astronauts for space flight. Howard obtained NASA's permission and assistance in filming in the realistic conditions aboard multiple KC-135 flights. Cast training and filming. In Los Angeles, Ed Harris and all the actors portraying flight controllers enrolled in a flight controller school led by Jerry Griffin, an Apollo 13 flight director, and flight controller Jerry Bostick. The actors studied audio tapes from the mission, reviewed hundreds of pages of NASA transcripts, and attended a crash course in physics. Astronaut Dave Scott was impressed with their efforts, stating that each actor was determined to make every scene technically correct, word for word. Soundtrack. The score to Apollo 13 was composed and conducted by James Horner. The soundtrack was released in 1995 by MCA Records, and has 7 tracks of score, 8 period songs used in the film, and 7 tracks of dialogue by the actors, at a running time of nearly 78 minutes. The music also features solos by vocalist Annie Lennox and Tim Morrison on the trumpet. The score was a critical success and garnered Horner an Academy Award nomination for Best Original Score. Release. The film was released on June 30, 1995 in North America and on September 22, 1995 in the UK. In September 2002 the film was re-released in IMAX. It was the first film to be digitally remastered using IMAX DMA technology. Reception. Review aggregator Rotten Tomatoes reports that the film has an overall approval rating of 95%, based on 85 reviews, with a weighted average rating of 8.2. The site's critical consensus reads, "In recreating the troubled space mission, Apollo 13 pulls no punches, it's a masterfully told drama from director Ron Howard, bolstered by an ensemble of solid performances." Metacritic, which assigns a normalized rating to reviews from mainstream critics, gave the film an average score of 77 out of 100, based on 22 critics, indicating generally favorable reviews. Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times praised the film in his review saying, "A powerful story, one of the year's best films, told with great clarity and remarkable technical detail, and acted without pumped-up histrionics." Richard Corliss from Time highly praised the film, saying, "From liftoff to splashdown, Apollo 13 gives one hell of a ride." Edward Guthman of San Francisco Chronicle gave a mixed review and wrote, "I just wish that Apollo 13 worked better as a movie, and that Howard's threshold for corn, mush and twinkly sentiment weren't so darn wide." Peter Travers from Rolling Stone praised the film and wrote, "Howard lays off the manipulation to tell the true story of the near-fatal 1970 Apollo 13 mission in painstaking and lively detail. It's easily Howard's best film." Movie Room Reviews said, "This film is arguably one of the most dramatic and horrendous spaceflight stories ever told." Janet Maslin made the film a neat critic's pick, calling it an absolutely thrilling film that unfolds with perfect immediacy, drawing viewers into the nail-biting suspense of a spellbinding true story. According to Maslin, like Quiz Show, Apollo 13 beautifully evokes recent history in ways that resonate strongly today. Cleverly nostalgic in its visual style, it harks back to movie-making without phony heroics and to the strong spirit of community that enveloped the astronauts and their families. Amazingly, this film manages to seem refreshingly honest while still conforming to the 3-act dramatic format of a standard Hollywood hit. It is far and away the best thing Mr. Howard has done. The academic critic Raymond Malevitz focuses on the DIY aspects of the mailbox filtration system to illustrate the emergence of an unlikely hero in late 20th century American culture, the creative, improvisational, but restrained thinker, who replaces the older prodigal cowboy heroes of American mythology and provides the country a better, more frugal example of an appropriate husband. Ron Howard stated that, after the first test preview of the film, one of the comment cards indicated total disdain. The audience member had written that it was a typical Hollywood ending, and that the crew would never have survived. Marilyn Lovell praised Quinlan's portrayal of her, stating she felt she could feel what Quinlan's character was going through, and remembered how she felt in her mind. Brought to you by WikiVidi Documentaries. Would you like to know more?